there's a moment, right before the applause dies down, when you realize the celebration isn't for you. It's for your exit. They said it was a historic day for Dynex Global. That's what the email had called it. A full company assembly, an open bar, and even a string quartet by the stage. The kind of grand display you only see when someone retires, or when someone saves the company. Apparently, I'd done the latter. My name is Holly Jameson, Senior Account Strategist, at least. That's what it said on my badge this morning, after 7 years of grinding through failed pitches and empty promises. I finally delivered what everyone else had failed to. North Crest Capital, a client Dynex had chased for a decade, a deal worth over $380 million in projected returns. So when they called me to the stage, I let myself feel it, just for a second. The pride, the relief, the distant, hopeful whisper that maybe, finally, I was more than just the woman behind the numbers. I walked up the stairs slowly, trying not to let the emotion show. The ballroom lights were hot on my face. Applause thundered like waves in a closed room. There were banners overhead, Dynex Rises, and Ray Mendez, the CEO, was waiting center stage, holding a polished glass trophy with my name etched into it. He shook my hand, leaned in for the staged photo op, and smiled wide for the crowd. And then, through his teeth, with his lips barely moving, he whispered, "There's a severance letter waiting under your chair, effective immediately." I blinked, smile. Holly, cameras are still flashing. The applause hadn't even faded yet. My ears rang, not from the noise, but from the silence inside me. My fingers tightened around the base of the trophy, and I nodded mechanically for the crowd. People stood. They clapped harder. All I could hear was the word, severance. I glanced down at the CEO's polished shoes, then up at the crowd, faces I knew. Some I'd mentored, some I'd helped hire. None of them knew. Or maybe some did. The smile stayed on my face, but something inside me cracked. And in that precise moment, somewhere between the applause and the betrayal, I understood something simple, sharp, and permanent. This wasn't an award. It was my curtain call. I stood there, holding the trophy that had suddenly turned into a paperweight of betrayal. My smile stayed frozen. The muscles in my face stiff like plaster. Cameras were still clicking, and the crowd, bless them, kept cheering, unaware that the woman they were applauding had just been told she was already out of a job. Still, I couldn't just walk off the stage. Not yet. I had something I needed to say. I stepped forward, fingers tightening around the microphone stand. I looked out into the sea of colleagues, faces I'd known for years. Many of them had been on late-night calls with me. Some had skipped family dinners to help push the North Crest deal forward. If this was my last moment, I wasn't leaving without thanking them. "I just want to say," I began, my voice surprisingly steady. But then, nothing. Silence. I tapped the mic gently. Nothing. I glanced at the sound crew in the back of the room. One of them looked up from his board, eyebrows raised in confusion. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Just a quick thank you to—" Cut. The ballroom was eerily quiet. Then, before the awkwardness could settle, the MC stepped in. "Thank you, Holly, for that inspiring contribution. Now, on to our next honoree." He waved a hand toward someone else. The string quartet began to play again. Light applause, then chatter. I was ushered, gently but firmly, toward the steps by a stage assistant, who avoided looking at me directly. It took a full 3 seconds for me to process what just happened. My mic had been intentionally cut. No malfunction, no technical glitch. It was deliberate, and judging by the swift transition, planned. I walked back to my seat in a daze. Trophy clutched to my chest like a shield. People smiled as I passed, some politely, others stiffly. But not one person made eye contact for more than a second. It was as if something about me had suddenly turned radioactive. When I sat down, I instinctively looked beneath my chair. There it was. A white envelope. No name. No logo. Just one word in bold font on the front. Confidential. Before I could even open it, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Marcia, head of HR, standing over me with an unreadable expression. "Holly, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" I nodded slowly, the envelope still in my hand. I followed her out of the ballroom, away from the music, away from the lights, down a narrow hall with beige carpeting and fake potted plants that somehow made the place feel even more corporate than it already was. We stepped into a glass-walled conference room. She closed the door. "We wanted to have this conversation after the ceremony," she said, "but there's been a change of timing." She slid a document across the table toward me. I hadn't even opened the envelope yet, but I knew what it was. It was the same content, just now delivered verbally to remove any room for questions. Due to a restructuring in leadership and budget alignment, your position is being dissolved effective immediately. Your severance package has been prepared. I stared at her, my mouth opened, but no words came. I had brought in a client worth hundreds of millions. I had saved their quarter. I had saved Ray's repute, and they were erasing me in the middle of my own standing ovation. The applause still echoed in my ears. Only now. It sounded like laughter. The road was empty, quiet in a way that made the engine hum feel louder than it should. Headlights washed over the guardrails in rhythmic flashes as I drove up the incline toward the Golden Gate Bridge. It was nearly 11 p.m. Too late for tourists. Too early for sunrise chasers. Just the hour where thoughts start whispering louder than the world around you. I wasn't sure why I was heading there. Maybe I just needed to be near something that didn't lie. Something that didn't pretend to clap for you before stabbing you clean in the chest. The fog rolled in from the bay, like a curtain being drawn over a stage I'd been dragged off too early. I parked in the Overlook lot near Battery Spencer. The wind hit me hard the moment I stepped out. Cool, sharp, like it didn't care who I was or what I'd done. I walked across the gravel path until I reached it. The bench. A worn wooden bench, half hidden behind a slanted cypress tree, facing the lights of San Francisco across the bay. I'd come here during hard quarters, back when I was still a junior strategist, when I needed to think, or cry, or just breathe. And now here I was again, 7 years older, holding a career that had crumbled in the middle of applause. I sat down slowly, hugging my coat tighter around me. Though the cold inside didn't come from the wind, my mind kept racing. Even though my body was still, I saw the flashes, the conference room, the mic going dead, the look on Marcia's face. I had spent months negotiating that deal, dozens of sleepless nights. I pulled 3 back-to-back all-nighters in October alone, just to make the numbers line up for North Crest. And the sacrifices. God. My mom's birthday dinner, I skipped it. Just this once. Mom, this deal could change everything. The anniversary party my best friend begged me to attend. I sent flowers and a voice memo. Thanksgiving? I had microwave stuffing in the office kitchen while drafting the final presentation deck. They never saw those things. Ray didn't care. HR didn't care. The applause didn't care. The moment I was no longer useful. They erased me like a forgotten tab on a spreadsheet. I stared out over the black water, city lights reflecting off the current. I felt like I was watching the world from the outside. A ghost of a woman who used to believe in loyalty, somewhere in the mess of thoughts. A memory resurfaced, quiet but distinct. Clause 17B. It came back in a flash. The negotiation, the legal draft, the meeting with Paul from North Crest. This contract must be executed and overseen by Holly Jameson directly, he'd said, back in that 4th-floor conference room overlooking the marina. We're not doing this with Dynex. We're doing it with you. So we added the clause. No oversight from me. No deal. I sat up straighter. The fog around my heart thinned just enough to let one sharp thought in. They didn't read it. They didn't see what they'd signed. Clause 17B was legally binding. It wasn't decorative. It meant that if I wasn't employed and leading the account, Northcrest had grounds to terminate the entire contract. I blinked. The very deal they had used to parade me around, the very one they celebrated, had just been sabotaged by their own stupidity. A strange kind of calm settled over me. Not peace. Not yet. But something sturdier than shock. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the printed contract I'd refused to leave on my desk. My name was there, in black and white. Oversight, Holly Jameson only. They didn't just fire me. They might have just fired the contract. And that changed everything. By the time I got back to my apartment, the city had gone quiet. Even the street below my window, normally alive with late-night delivery bikes and sirens, felt muted, like the world knew I needed the silence. I tossed my coat over the kitchen stool, kicked off my heels, and let the trophy clunk onto the counter like a mockery. Still gleaming, still pointless. But I couldn't sleep. Not after what I'd remembered on that bench. Clause 17B. It had flashed into my mind like a rescue flare cutting through fog. And now it wouldn't leave me alone. I crossed the living room and opened my laptop, fingers moving with a kind of muscle memory I hadn't felt in hours. My desktop was still cluttered with files from the Northcrest negotiations, drafts, appendices, screenshots of contract language with notes in the margins. I pulled them up one by one, scrolling faster than my eyes could fully track. There it was. Contract Final V4 Sign.pdf. I opened it, scanned, found the page. Section 17. Oversight and Account Authority. Paragraph B. All strategic account direction, communication, and performance management shall be conducted by Holly Jameson in the event that Holly Jameson is no longer acting in this role. The contract is subject to immediate review and potential nullification by Northcrest Capital. I read it once, then again, and again. They'd signed this. Ray had signed this, and not just Ray, so had Paul. So had Northcrest's legal team, so had Dynex's. But had anyone really read it? Clause 17B wasn't just a formality. It wasn't fluff. It was protective infrastructure. Northcrest had demanded it because, from the start, they made it clear they were signing with me, not with Dynex. I clicked open the final email thread I'd sent Paul, the one that included the signed contract and the confirmation of account kickoff. My heart slowed as I scrolled to the CC line. It read, to paul.whitaker@northcrestcapital.com. CC, holly.jameson@dynexglobal.com. Subject, Final Agreement, Fully Executed Paul. Thank you for your trust and partnership. Attached is the fully signed agreement and project timeline. I'm looking forward to working together on this exciting path forward. Regards, Holly. That was it. No Ray, no legal team, no ops, no PR. Just me. I leaned back slowly, staring at the screen. The irony was staggering. They'd used me as the face of the deal, the driving force behind the win, the brand ambassador for trust and vision. But they hadn't included themselves in the most crucial step, the delivery. That clause wasn't a loose end. It was a fuse, and they had just lit it by firing me. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the empty street. Curiosity had given way to something firmer now. Not rage, not bitterness, resolve. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to grovel. I didn't need to slam doors or post bitter rants online. I had something better, a signed contract, a legal clause, and the knowledge that I held the one card they didn't even know they'd dealt me. They thought they were done with me. But I was just getting started, and tomorrow morning, I would make the call that would change everything. The screen glowed in the dark like a portal I wasn't ready to open. I sat cross-legged on the edge of my couch, the Northcrest contract still open on my laptop, Clause 17B, staring at me like a quiet lifeline. The apartment around me was still and dim, just the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock keeping time with my hesitation. I stared at Paul Whitaker's contact for nearly 5 minutes. His name sat there, unbothered, surrounded by every other executive I'd ever emailed in a suit and smile blur. But Paul had always been different, calm, sharp, unnervingly perceptive when we first met. I'd been surprised by how much he listened before speaking. The man didn't waste words or time, which made this all the more terrifying. I picked up the phone. 1 ring, 2, 3. Paul Whitaker. His voice was the same as I remembered, steady and clear, like a man who always had his footing. I swallowed once, tightening my grip on the phone. "Hi, Paul, it's Holly." There was a beat of silence. "Holly, good evening. You're calling late. Everything all right?" I hesitated. I wasn't sure whether to call, but you need to know, I've been let go, as of today. Another pause. But this time, I could feel the tension spike through the line. "Let go?" he repeated. "Yes, effective immediately, after the ceremony. Dynex. They handed me my severance." There was no background noise on his end, no typing, no papers rustling, just silence. Held so tightly, it felt like something was being calibrated. "That can't be right," he said finally. Voice lower now. "You're our lead. You negotiated the entire deal. Why on earth would they—" He didn't finish the question. Maybe he already knew there wouldn't be a good answer. I took a deep breath. There's a clause in the contract, 17B. It states that strategic direction and communication must be led by me. If not, the agreement can be voided. Paul exhaled. Slowly. Almost like he'd just remembered that part too. "I remember. You fought hard for that. We insisted on it." His tone had changed. Calculated now. Like the gears in his head were already turning. I suddenly felt smaller. Like I'd handed him a live wire and wasn't sure if he'd cut it or let it spark. "Do you have time to meet tomorrow morning?" he asked. "In person?" I blinked. "Yes, of course. I can come to your office." "No, my calendar's full, but we're in the city for the annual finance summit. I'll send the address of the hotel. 7:30 sharp. Bring a printed copy of the contract." My fingers were already moving to grab a pen. "Paul," I said quietly, "just so I understand, are you planning to terminate?" He didn't answer right away. Then, softly, and without any performance in his voice, he said the words that reached somewhere I hadn't let myself feel all night. "Holly, let me be honest with you. I didn't sign with Dynex." Another pause. "I signed with you." I sat frozen. His words landed like warm weight on a bruised chest. I didn't know what to say, how to process that admission. He cleared his throat. "Get some rest. I'll see you in the morning." The line disconnected before I could respond. I lowered the phone into my lap, hands still trembling slightly. For hours. I'd been teetering between shock and numbness. But that call, those final words, shook something loose. Someone had seen me, not the brand, not the company, me. And that fragile recognition, however small, was enough to turn my quiet devastation into the first flicker of fire. Not rage, not yet, but something better, readiness. I was up before 5, not out of anxiety, but clarity. There's something sacred about the early morning when the city hasn't quite woken up. When the noise hasn't had a chance to tell you what you should feel. In that silence. I stood in front of my closet and reached for the black suit. Not navy, not charcoal, black. It wasn't mourning. It was declaration. A soft, tailored middle finger wrapped in silk lining. By 6:15. I had everything I needed in one neat folder: a certified copy of the Northcrest contract, my resignation letter from Dynex, the legal formation of Hollis & Co., my new consulting agency, a printed transition plan, complete with a 30-day roadmap and contingency clauses. There were no logos, no fluff, just clean pages, simple fonts, bulletproof logic. I took the early train downtown, then walked the last 6 blocks to the Grand Halston Hotel, where Northcrest's executive team was staying for the summit. The air was crisp, fog clinging to the skyline like a veil. It reminded me of the bench the night before, but this time, the cold didn't reach my bones. Inside the lobby, everything smelled like cedar and money: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, a pianist playing something soft and slow in the far corner. I checked my reflection in one of the gilded elevator doors. Neat bun, subtle makeup, eyes steady. There was no trace of the woman who had been ambushed on stage just 24 hours earlier. At 7:28, Paul Whitaker appeared. He was in a slate gray suit, his tie a shade off from silver. Behind him trailed a younger man in wire-framed glasses. Holding a tablet, Paul gestured toward me. "Holly, come upstairs." No pleasantries, no wasted time. I followed. We met in one of the executive lounges on the 26th floor. Glass walls, city view, soft chairs meant to disarm you. But I was already beyond disarmed. I was dialed in. Paul sat. I did the same. His assistant remained standing, quietly observing. "Let's hear it," Paul said. I didn't fumble, didn't hesitate. I opened the folder, handed him the contract with the highlighted clause 17B, then slid over the transition plan. As of yesterday, I am no longer employed by Dynex, per our agreement. That renders the current contract subject to immediate review. However, I'm proposing a direct transition under Hollis & Co., my agency. Same personnel oversight, same strategic roadmap, no disruption. Legal formation was completed at 5:02 this morning. EIN is included in the appendix. Paul didn't blink. He read quickly, flipping pages like a man who understood the stakes and appreciated someone who came prepared. After a few minutes, he leaned back, folding his hands. "You move fast." "You taught me that," I said, calm and precise. He let out something between a breath and a laugh. "And the systems? Will you have access to the CRM environment, analytics dashboards, forecasting tools?" "Everything I built," I replied. I own the IP for the custom tools under independent developer clauses, filed outside of Dynex systems. The analytics layer? Proprietary? They can't use it without a license. Paul looked over at his assistant, who gave a silent nod. Then he looked back at me. "This deal's too big to fail. We'll move it under you, provided transition goes smoothly." I was ready to say thank you, to end the meeting, but then he added, "And I have 5 other legacy accounts, quietly looking to shift away from Dynex. Could you handle them, too?" It took me a second to process the question. He wasn't just saving me, he was testing me. "I can," I said. "If I can build them, I can carry them." He nodded once. "Then we'll draft the documents today. And Holly, congratulations." As I stood to leave, he added, "Ray's going to be furious." I gave a slight smile, one I hadn't worn in years. "He should be." And with that, I walked out of the room, not rehired, not rescued, reclaimed. I didn't go home after the meeting with Paul. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to a cafe with fast Wi-Fi and terrible espresso, exactly the kind of place where new ideas are born under pressure and fluorescent lights. I ordered a small coffee out of habit, not taste, and claimed a quiet table by the wall. I opened my laptop, cracked my knuckles, and whispered to myself, "Let's build this." The first thing I did was choose a name, not something flashy or corporate sounding. I didn't want to sound like a law firm or a finance committee. I wanted a name that carried a whisper of who I was, without giving it all away. Hollis & Co. Hollis was my grandmother's name, a woman who ran her own real estate office in the 1960s when men told her to stay home and cook. She taught me how to sign a check before I knew how to ride a bike. It felt right. By 1:30 in the afternoon, I had filed the legal paperwork, generated an EIN, and registered the domain hollisandco.com. A temporary website went live with just a logo and a single sentence in serif font. A strategic consulting practice built on results, not applause. The logo? I designed it myself using an online generator. A minimalist black and white H inside a circle. Clean, serious, sharp. Then came the LinkedIn page. I posted nothing flashy, just a quiet announcement. After 7 years at Dynex Global, I'm starting a new chapter. Hollis & Co. is now open for business. We believe in strategy rooted in ethics and execution guided by experience. Let's build something better. I hit post and let the algorithm do its thing. Then I made 2 calls. The first was to Claire, a brilliant data analyst who was laid off 6 months ago in a so-called budget cut. She picked up on the third ring. Holly, oh my God, I saw your LinkedIn update like 5 seconds ago. Tell me this is real. It's real. I need your brain and your spreadsheets. Interested? Do you even have to ask? The second call was to Luis, a creative strategist who used to run circles around the marketing team but was let go for being too disruptive, which at Dynex meant too honest. Are you serious? He said when I explained. I'm building something cleaner, smaller, smarter. I've been waiting for this call since the day they let me go. Count me in. By 4:30, our Slack workspace was live. We had channels named Ops, Contracts, and Winbacks. Luis dropped in early mock-ups for a pitch deck. Claire uploaded a predictive forecast model for client retention. We were moving. It was scrappy, raw, but it was ours. At 5:15, as I was drafting onboarding documents, a message popped up in my inbox. The sender's name stopped me cold. Avery Langston, CMO of Stratowell Industries, one of Dynex's legacy clients, and one I had helped secure years ago through a grueling, months-long negotiation. Her message was brief. Heard about what happened. Honestly, I'm not surprised. Are you taking clients? If so, I'd like to talk. I'm ready to move. I reread the message 3 times. Then, I let out the first real laugh I'd had in days. Avery didn't wait to be poached. She came to me. That's when it hit me. I didn't have to take anything from Dynex. I just had to build something they couldn't compete with. By 6 o'clock, Claire sent over a list of potential clients who had liked or commented on my post. Luis updated our tagline. Not just surviving, advancing. I looked around the cafe, the flickering lights, the clatter of dishes, and realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast. My head buzzed with numbers, design ideas, timelines, and beneath it all was a current I hadn't felt in years. Excitement, creation, control. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't asking for a seat at someone else's table. I was building my own, and people were already lining up to sit down. Corporate chaos doesn't always sound like sirens and shouting. Sometimes. It begins with the subtle tension of unanswered emails, login failures, and polite clients asking the wrong people the right questions. And at Dynex Global, the storm didn't start with thunder. It started with silence. The morning after Hollis & Co. went live, Dynex headquarters was already buzzing, but not in the usual, caffeinated, Monday morning kind of way. It was the buzz of confusion disguised as professionalism. People were smiling too tightly. Phones rang a little longer before being picked up. Executives walked faster down the hallway, their steps just a bit too loud. By 9:12, Janice, A mid-tier project manager knocked on Ray Mendez's office door, holding her tablet awkwardly. "We can't access the client portal for Northcrest," she said. "Their end is rejecting credentials." Ray waved her off. "Tech thing. Escalate to IT." By 10:30, 3 more managers reported access issues, not just with Northcrest, but with internal dashboards tied to Holly's systems. A few tried to explain that she had developed custom tracking frameworks, analytics overlays, and interface bridges that had never been fully documented. "She ran it all through shared systems," one of them said. "No," another corrected. "She ran it through herself." Ray, always the picture of calm arrogance, leaned back in his chair and said, "We'll replicate it. Hire someone else." But the real damage hadn't shown its teeth yet. At 11:05 a.m., Avery Langston from Stratowell Industries called the front desk asking to speak to Holly. When informed that Holly was no longer with the company, Avery's tone turned to ice. "Then I'll need to speak with whoever approved terminating the woman managing our $62 million campaign. Immediately." The receptionist, rattled, transferred her to someone in legal. She never called back. At 11:40, another client, Marco from Harridan Capital, called the sales team. "We'll be pausing the contract until Holly returns our call. She's the only one who ever understood our systems." Tio. By noon, the buzz had escalated into meetings behind closed doors, hushed voices in glass offices, and one sharply worded email from legal to HR with the subject line, "Urgent, contract clause inquiry, Northcrest, meanwhile." In my apartment across town, I was on mute during a Slack call with Claire and Luis, watching my inbox light up. I didn't answer the messages. I didn't respond to the vague, "Can we talk?" emails from former colleagues. I didn't even flinch when Ray called my cell. 3 times. I let them all go to voicemail. No rage, no revenge speech, just deliberate. Calm non-engagement. But I did open a message from Elena Marks, Dynex's junior legal associate, the same woman who once dismissed my concerns about clause visibility with, "Legal always skims. Don't worry." This time, she wasn't skimming. She was panicking. "Holly, I know you're probably not interested in hearing from anyone at Dynex, but I need to ask you something purely for documentation. Did you insert Clause 17B into the Northcrest agreement as a binding condition of delivery? Please confirm. Elena." I read it twice. Then I typed 2 words back. "Fully enforceable." I didn't say more. I didn't gloat. But I knew what would happen next. Back at Dynex, Elena brought the original signed agreement to General Counsel. Together, they reviewed the language under a magnifying lamp, as if hoping the font would change under scrutiny. It didn't. Clause 17B was airtight. By 3:15 that afternoon, Ray finally cracked. He called Paul Whitaker directly, demanding clarification. Paul's response was reportedly short. "You fired the condition. The deal dies with her." Then he hung up. No shouting, no threats. Just silence. The kind of silence that slices deeper than words. In the background, Hollis & Co. gained 3 new client inquiries that day, at Dynex. Silence reigned, but it was not the calm kind. It was the sound of systems slowing, of reputation unraveling, and of a man finally realizing he'd pulled the wrong thread. And I, quietly sipping my tea, watching my calendar fill, didn't need to say a word. It was nearly midnight, and my apartment was dark, save for the glow of 2 open tabs on my screen. One showed the performance metrics of Hollis & Co. The growth curve was steep. The second was an article someone had just sent me. Dynex faces operational disruption following leadership shakeup. I should have felt satisfied, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I sat curled on my couch, legs tucked under me, heart thudding in that strange in-between space where success and conscience begin to overlap. That's when the message came in. An old contact from the back-end development team at Dynex, Max Liu. Quiet, brilliant, and one of the few people at the company who had always been real with me. We hadn't spoken since he was laid off 6 months ago during the third round of strategic realignment. Max. Heard what they did. I'm still mad for you. You want a little poetic justice? Me. Depends on the poetry. Max. I still have access to the old infrastructure. Built a kill switch script months ago when they asked me to automate your dashboard without you. Want me to flip it? It'll freeze their entire CRM layer. Just say the word. I stared at the screen. My first thought wasn't no. It was, how fast? And that scared me. For a second. Just 1 second. I imagined it. The chaos. The headlines. The looks on their smug faces as everything ground to a halt. I imagined Ray storming down the hallways. Powerless. I imagined silence in those glass offices, this time drenched in panic instead of arrogance. But then I remembered something else. A conversation I had with Claire just that morning, when she said, "Let's build a company that doesn't just work. Let's build one that's worth believing in." And the way Luis had proudly posted our first onboarding video titled, "Win with Integrity or Don't Win at All." If I let Max press that button, was I really winning? I typed slowly. Me. I appreciate it, truly. But don't do it. They'll collapse on their own, and when they do, it'll be because of their choices. Not mine. Max. Respect. That's why people follow you. Holly, still. I'll keep the switch handy, just in case. I smiled, but it didn't last, because even after saying no, the weight of the decision hung on me. Heavy, moral, exposing. I shut the laptop, sat back, stared at the ceiling. Was I becoming the kind of leader I wanted to be? Or was I still reacting like someone trying to prove she belonged? Outside, the city breathed softly, cars below, a plane overhead, the hum of life continuing. And then, like a well-timed answer, I got an alert on my phone. System watch, Dynex client, net CRM error, Tier 2, degradation detected. I blinked, followed by a second alert. Dynex client net CRM error, form data, parsing failure. My breath caught. I hadn't done anything. Max hadn't done anything. This wasn't sabotage. It was incompetence. They were trying to keep my systems running without me, patching things they didn't understand, rebuilding dashboards they didn't know I had customized, forgetting I had embedded workflows that required daily calibration. I checked a few industry forums. Someone had already posted. Anyone know what's going on with Dynex's client interface? Our forms aren't saving properly. Whole account just vanished. There it was, their undoing, happening in real time, not with a bang, not with a crash, but with the quiet disintegration of everything they had taken for granted. And I had nothing to do with it, for the first time in days. I felt something that wasn't tension or urgency. I felt clean. The kind of clean that comes from knowing you had the chance to burn it all down, but chose instead to let the rot reveal itself. I poured myself a glass of water and whispered to the night, "Let them collapse with dignity. I've already moved on." I didn't bring flowers. I didn't wear anything new. When I stepped into the same executive lounge where I had first pitched Hollis & Co. less than a week ago, I looked exactly the same. Black suit, tied back hair, minimalist laptop case in hand. But everything had changed. The room was already set up. 2 chairs, a clean glass table, and a single folder placed neatly in the center. Paul Whitaker was standing by the window, his back to me, watching the fog roll over the skyline. There was no small talk, no pleasantries, only the kind of quiet that precedes something final. "Holly," he said, turning toward me. "It's done." "Satki?" He gestured toward the folder. I picked it up and opened it slowly, scanning the first few pages. Service transition agreement between Northcrest Capital and Hollis & Co. There it was, signed, stamped, dated. I paused at the line item under the performance incentives section and looked up at him. 5% bonus? Paul nodded. You handled this with grace and speed. That's rare. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The moment already belonged to me. I won't waste it, I said. I know, he replied, then added more softly. You never did. He sat down and poured himself a cup of coffee from the tray the hotel had provided. I remained standing, holding the folder like a quiet promise to everything I'd sacrificed to get here. There's one more thing you should know, Paul said, almost as an afterthought. You didn't just gain a client this week. You cost Dynex one of their biggest investors. I blinked. Excuse me? He sipped his coffee, then leaned back like someone telling a story he already knew would land. Ever heard of Halverton Equity? Of course I had. They'd been Dynex's lifeline for 3 years, injecting capital during market dips, bailing them out of a messy supply chain failure, underwriting 3 product expansions. They called me this morning, Paul said. Asked about the leadership shift. I told them the truth, that you were out, and that we'd moved the entire contract with you. He let that hang for a second. Their managing partner said, and I quote, "We don't invest in companies that burn the people keeping the lights on. They're pulling their capital within 30 days. I didn't react. Not outwardly, but inside. A stillness formed, the kind of stillness that only comes from vindication without violence. Not a single word I had spoken had brought this about. Just action. Just excellence. Just proof. Later that day, I sat with Claire and Luis at our co-working space. It was nothing fancy. Exposed brick, overworked coffee machine, a wall of whiteboards already half covered in notes. We were finalizing onboarding plans for 2 new clients when Claire looked up from her screen. Did you hear? She asked. Dynex stock dipped another 4% this morning. Luis whistled. Karma's fast this week. I shrugged. It's not karma, it's math. When you subtract value, you subtract support. Neither of them replied. But I saw it. The way their eyes lingered just a second longer. The way their posture leaned forward. I wasn't just someone they worked with. I was someone they were proud to follow. Not because I was loud, not because I'd gone nuclear, but because I'd let my work speak. That evening, I walked home without music in my ears. Just the sound of traffic, muffled voices, the hum of city life. I stopped at the corner bookstore near my apartment and bought a pen. A good one, solid brass, heavy in the hand. When I got home, I signed the client agreement in ink. I didn't post about it, didn't tell the press, didn't draft a victory thread on LinkedIn, but somewhere in an office downtown. An investor was pulling out of Dynex. Somewhere else. A client was forwarding my new agency's proposal to legal. And in the middle of it all, I was exactly where I needed to be. Unshaken, unapologetic, and fully in control. By the time I poured my morning coffee, the ripple had already become a wave. The markets opened at 9:30, and by 9:42, Dynex Global stock had dropped 17.2%, its sharpest one-day dip in nearly 4 years. I didn't need to watch it happen. I already knew it was coming. Still, a quiet part of me hovered over the financial news tab, sipping slowly as headlines rolled in like drumbeats. Dynex stock tumbles. Following client and investor departures. Strategic collapse or leadership failure. Analysts weigh in on the Dynex downturn. Who was Holly Jamieson, and why did her exit break the system? I read that last one twice. Not because of the title, but because of the wording. Who was Holly Jamieson? I wasn't gone. I wasn't buried. I had simply stopped answering to their story. And now, they were rewriting it in my absence. At 10:08 a.m., I got a message from Tasha Riley, a senior finance reporter from Market Pulse, asking if I'd be open to a quiet off-record chat about Dynex's leadership changes and client fallout. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Claire with a note. We don't chase the narrative, we build one. Luis added a winking emoji and started drafting a milestone post for Hollis & Co's third signed client in 5 days. We were running lean, moving fast, and none of us had time to gloat. But satisfaction didn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looked like quiet rhythm. And this week, our rhythm was steady and sharp. That afternoon, while reviewing contracts in our new shared workspace, my email pinged with a name I hadn't seen in years. Elliot Trammell, a former senior VP at Dynex, sharp dresser, louder ego. He used to call me the spreadsheet whisperer in meetings. Half joking, fully dismissive, always made a point to interrupt me just as I was landing key points in strategy sessions. Subject, checking in. The message was short. Holly, looks like you're doing well. I'm sure you're hearing this a lot, but things over here have shifted quickly. I've just submitted my resignation. Curious if you have space for someone with deep enterprise client knowledge and an open mind. No ego this time, just admiration. I stared at it for a long moment. Not because I was surprised, but because it marked something I hadn't expected to feel so clearly. Closure. I didn't need to write a long reply. I didn't need to remind him of who I was or what he once said. He already knew. His inbox was his confession. I forwarded it to Claire and typed 3 words underneath. What? A turn. She responded with a single line. When the lights go out, people remember who held the matches. Later that evening, I walked past Dynex's downtown office. Not intentionally, just instinct. The lights on the 22nd floor, the executive floor, were dim. The once glowing reception screen now showed a frozen loading screen. A maintenance tech stood nearby, muttering under his breath. As I stood at the crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, I saw 2 familiar figures step out of the revolving doors. Tara, head of PR, and Malik, operations chief, both carrying boxes. They didn't see me. Tara looked stiff, eyes forward. Malik looked deflated, his tie loose, collar undone. It wasn't poetic. It was just real. When the light turned green, I crossed the street and kept walking. No smug smile, no lingering, because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance being restored, 1 resignation, 1 unanswered email, 1 client switch at a time, that night. I lit a candle on my windowsill, not for anyone else, just for me. I poured a glass of white wine, opened my laptop, and reviewed our upcoming pitch deck. I was still building, still moving. But this time, I wasn't pushing against locked doors. They had been kicked open, and all I had to do was walk through them. The stage wasn't grand. There were no spotlights, no fog machines, no scrolling LED screens projecting my name in bold. Just a simple podium, a row of folding chairs, and a rented ballroom with carpet that smelled faintly of new paint and old ambition. But I wasn't here for the spectacle. I was here for the truth. 3 weeks after the Northcrest deal officially transitioned to Hollis & Co., I stood at the front of the Midwest Women in Leadership Conference, facing a room of about 100 attendees, most of them mid-level strategists, independent consultants, and rising managers from across the country. I hadn't been invited as a star or a keynote, just a guest speaker for the Ethics and Exit Strategies breakout panel. And yet, the room was packed. Extra chairs had been pulled in. A few attendees stood in the back. Others leaned against the side walls. Pens ready. I adjusted the mic, smiled gently. 3 weeks ago, I was fired at my own promotion ceremony. I began. Not after underperforming, not for misconduct, but after landing the biggest client in the company's history. A few heads tilted. Pens paused. I had their attention. It wasn't a blowout, no public showdown, just a quiet envelope slipped beneath my chair, and a whisper from the CEO between camera flashes. There were murmurs now, People nodding, sharing knowing glances. Some looked angry for me, others resigned, as if they'd lived it too. I kept going. But here's the thing, I didn't retaliate with fire. I didn't go online and tear the company down. I didn't publish exposés or leak files. What I did instead was remember who I was when no one was clapping. I paused there. Let the weight settle. I built my own firm. Within 72 hours, I had moved the client under my new banner, not out of spite, out of integrity. Because the client didn't choose the logo, they chose the person. Someone in the front row whispered. Damn right. I smiled. Just a little. Ethics isn't just about the rules you follow, it's about the lines you refuse to cross, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. In the audience, I saw Claire sitting toward the middle, her tablet resting on her knees, nodding along. Louise stood near the back wall, phone in hand, capturing just a few seconds to post later. They didn't need to hear the whole speech. They'd lived it. But one face near the far right corner stopped me cold. It was Ari, the intern from the promotion ceremony, the one who had been handed the North Crest files while I was escorted out the side door. Back then, she was nervous, bright-eyed, unsure of herself. Now she sat silently, notebook in hand, typing furiously into a laptop. She wasn't scrolling, she wasn't distracted, she was learning. I held her gaze for a second, then looked away, not out of discomfort, but respect, because I realized, in that moment, that this right here, was the actual prize, not the deal, not the clients, but the chance to speak and be heard. Not because someone gave me a platform, but because I had earned it, with silence, with strategy, and with the refusal to play a dirty game. When the talk ended, there was no standing ovation, just soft applause, warm nods, a few glistening eyes. No one rushed the stage, no one shouted my name, but as I stepped down and walked past the rows of chairs, person after person stopped me, not to congratulate, but to thank. You gave me permission to walk away. I didn't think quiet power could win, but now I see it can. This makes me want to rewrite how I lead. And then, just before I exited the room, a quiet voice called out behind me, Ms. Jameson? I turned. Ari stood there, notebook closed. Her voice was steadier than I remembered. Do you need a new research assistant? It took me a moment, then I smiled. I might. That night, I walked alone through the quiet streets of downtown, heels clicking softly against the concrete. I passed no skyscrapers bearing my name, no newspapers with my photo, just the cool wind on my skin and the feeling that, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running toward anything. I was already there. I didn't reclaim the stage they stole from me. I built my own. If Holly's story reminded you that dignity still has power, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, the quietest voice in the room carries the sharpest truth, and sometimes, walking away isn't losing, it's beginning.